truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
State your name for the record, please.
Mary Ellen Hill.
Are you a paramedic as well as an EMT, Ms. Hill?
I am.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a paramedic does, please.
Paramedic is a level above an EMT. An EMT does basic life support skills like first aid and driving skills and lifting, bandaging and such. And a paramedic actually does a whole lot more. They can do, at the direction of a physician, skills that only a physician is able to do.
Ms. Hill, how long have you been involved in emergency medical services?
About 28 years.
Tell the jury, if you would, please, about your certifications and qualifications in that regard.
I am a Georgia certified paramedic. I'm a nationally registered paramedic. I am also a level 3 paramedic instructor with the state of Georgia. Level 3 is the highest level that you can be as an instructor. I am also a American Heart Association life support instructor for all the discipline levels they have for like CPR training and all the way up through advanced training and even into pediatric training. I also am a certified firefighter. I have a bachelor's degree in paramedic science, and I also teach the pre-hospital trauma life support classes, which teach you about taking care of patients who are injured.
Where do you work now?
I work for Southside Fire and EMS.
What is your rank there?
I am lieutenant over EMS training.
So do you train other EMTs and paramedics as part of your job?
Yes, sir, both current paramedics and EMTs and the new incoming groups.
Where were you working when this wreck happened in February of 2010?
Actually, I work for Memorial Health University Medical Center in Savannah. Actually, I was working in the education department, which is actually my job was over the ambulance service because Memorial actually ran MedStar ambulance service.
Were you training others with MedStar and Memorial just as you are with Southside?
Yes, sir. I had the same exact job.
When you teach other EMTs and paramedics, Ms. Hill, do you use specific examples?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you like real wrecks? Do you use real wrecks to teach with?
Yes, sir, because using those kinds of calls that I have written in the past is a good way to show how things happen based upon new vehicles and old vehicles and that such.
Have you ever used this wreck as a teaching tool when you're teaching other EMTs and paramedics at Southside and at MedStar?
Yes, sir, I have.
How many times do you think you've used this wreck as a teaching tool for other EMTs and paramedics?
At least a couple of dozen.
In your career, Ms. Hill, how many car wrecks do you think you've responded to as an emergency responder?
Oh, well, probably well over 1,000, sir.
Did you have occasion on February 5, 2010 to respond to a rollover wreck on I-16?
Yes, sir, I did.
Where were you when you first got the call about that wreck?
Chief Benji Cowart, Lieutenant Ryan Riley, and myself being a lieutenant, we had gone to lunch and were just leaving the restaurant when the call went out, so we responded from there.
How long did it take you to get to the scene of the wreck?
About 10 minutes.
Were you among the first to arrive?
I was well, yes, sir, and no, sir. We had some firemen on the scene, but I also had one employee that worked for MedStar that had arrived before we did, just before we did.
Was that the only person from MedStar to arrive before y'all did?
Yes, sir.
What did you see when you arrived on the scene of this wreck, Ms. Hill?
Well, what I noticed first was this vehicle was up against the tree line, and it looked like it had rolled, and I saw where it looked like the right front passenger roof was caved in.
So what did you do once you noticed that the right front passenger roof was caved in?
Well, I went straight over to it, and Gabriel was already there. He is the other gentleman who was there before us. He was attempting to get in the window, but you could not, so the fire department was dragging equipment up, heavy equipment, to extricate the patient. There was a gentleman in the car on the other side and somebody in the back seat, but I didn't see about them to begin with. I went up to see about the person that was in the passenger seat. What
did you expect to find as you approached the car?
Well, what I usually do is when you look at that, you look at the kind of mechanism of injury with the roof being caved in. The first thing my thought was is that we would
Objection, Your
have.
Honor.
Hold on. What do you say, Mr. Butler?
Your Honor, I'm not sure the basis of the objection. Ms. Hill is describing
Your Honor,
what,
if we could-
what she did with respect to her training, if I could finish without being interrupted. What she expected on the basis of her training, she approached the vehicle.
What else, Mr. Toole?
Yes, Your Honor, there's been no foundation laid for this witness to give that type of opinion testimony here.
I sustain the objection at this time.
How many occupants were in this car, Ms. Hill?
There were 3.
And tell us, if you would, who was seated where?
There was a young lady in the back seat. I don't know who she was. And there was a gentleman getting out of the driver's seat, and then there was the lady in the front passenger seat.
All right, I'll represent to you that the lady in the front passenger seat was Miss Linda Hatfield. Did you take charge of Miss Hatfield's care?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you notice whether she was wearing her seatbelt?
She was.
What can you tell the jury about the position of Mrs. Hatfield's body as you approached the car?
She was pushed slightly forward to the left because of the roof down on the back of her head.
Would she have been able to move around based on your observations of her body in the car, or
No.
was she pinned in
Objection,
place?
Your Honor, as to what Ms. Hatfield may or may not have been able to do, speculation.
Your Honor, I'm just asking the witness to tell the jury what she observed about the position of the roof of Mrs. Hatfield's body. It's difficult to imagine something more relevant.
You don't need to elaborate. I'll overrule that objection. Go ahead.
Ms. Hill, the question was, what can you tell the jury about the position of the roof and Mrs. Hatfield's body and the degree to which she would have had freedom to move around?
She had not really a whole lot of room because the seatbelt had her pinned just forward with the roof against her.
What could you tell about Mrs. Hatfield's condition, her clinical condition, when you first approached the vehicle?
She was unresponsive, as to mean that she was not awake and we could not arouse her, so we knew that it was, at that time, a critical patient, what I would call a trauma protocol.
What can you tell the jury about the condition of the other passengers in the car?
The young lady that was in the back seat was very upset, and the gentleman, like I said, was getting out of the vehicle at that time, but I was focused on Miss Hatfield, so I'm not really sure of their conditions.
What was the first thing you did with respect to taking care of Mrs. Hatfield?
To get what we call inline C-spine and to hold her neck up to make sure that you put it back in line place like we're supposed to.
Did you observe any blood on Miss Hatfield?
Not initially, no, sir. A couple of minutes into that, Chief Cowart had climbed in on the driver's side to assist in taking hold of her neck because I was hanging out of the window and they were trying to get the door open. At that point in time, he was taking her neck and he said, "Mary, there's blood running down the side of her here. Where's the blood coming from?"
And what did you do once you realized that Miss Hatfield was bleeding?
Well, I took my gloved hands and started running across the top of her head like this, and then I ran back until I found a big mat of blood, and then I started separating hair till I found the wound on the back of her head, and my fingers fell into it. It was a laceration on the back of her head right here at the occiput.
Did your hands actually go into the wound?
My finger did, sir. I could feel it.
Turn your head, if you would, to the side and show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where the laceration was that your fingers fell into on Mrs. Hatfield's head.
It was about right here, sir.
Thank you. Have you had occasion to point to that part of your head before in this case?
Yes, sir, during the deposition with the Ford Motor Company.
I'd like to approach the witness, Your Honor, and show her a picture, if I may.
You may.
I think I recall from an earlier hearing the court didn't want to be asked every time we approached. Is that right?
That's correct. Is there a number attached to this?
What's the number of that exhibit, Ms. Hill?
252.3.
What is that document I just handed you?
It is a picture of myself at the deposition showing the exact point of where I said the laceration was.
Bob, could you put that up? It's 252.3. Yes, sir. And does that picture accurately show where the laceration was that you felt on Mrs. Hatfield's head?
Yes, sir, it does.
Is that the place that you pointed to almost 4 months ago when lawyers from Ford took your deposition?
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, Ms. Hill, I'd like to show you some photos that I'll represent to you show a bald spot or a scar.
Objection, Your Honor. There's no foundation for this.
I hadn't heard the question yet.
Well, I've got the exhibits, but it's just...
You may know what's coming, but I don't.
Okay.
If he can finish his question, I'll be glad to hear any objection you may have. What's your question, Mr. Butler?
Thank you, Your Honor. What I'd like to do is show Mrs. Hill some pictures that she has seen before that show a scar on Mrs. Hatfield's head. Now, we'll authenticate these and introduce them through a subsequent witness, but I'd like for Mrs. Hill to tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury whether she can say that this scar is in the same spot as the laceration to which Ms. Hill is pointing in the Exhibit 252.3.
What's the number of those photographs?
These are 21.4, 21.5, and 21.6.
You may show the photographs to the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you take a look at these, please, Ms. Hill? Just look through them. And Bob, would you put those up?
Objection, Your Honor. There's no foundation for these to be shown to the jury.
Your Honor, the witness can say.
Well, it hadn't been admitted as yet. She was just still looking at them.
He's just asked for the video guys.
You're right. That's why I said they haven't been admitted yet, and if there's an objection to them, I need to rule on that before they're shown to the jury.
Your Honor, we'll have a different witness later on to authenticate the photos and say what they are. But what I'd like to ask you, Ms. Hill, is whether the scar that's shown in those pictures as being on Mrs. Hatfield's head is in the same location as the laceration that you felt on the back of Mrs. Hatfield's head on February 5, 2010.
Yes, sir, it was.
Your Honor,
Sir?
This witness can't testify based on a hypothetical as a fact witness in the court on these issues that Mr. Butler is testifying.
I'll rule the objection.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Bob, would you put those up? Let's show them in sequence. 21.4, and then 21.5, and then 21.6. And Ms. Hill, the jury's now seeing Exhibit 21.6 for the first time. Is that the place where the laceration was that you felt on Mrs. Hatfield's head?
Yes, sir, it was.
Now, did you notice any other cuts or lacerations to Mrs. Hatfield's head on the scene of the wreck on February 5, 2010?
No, sir, I did not.
Is it possible there was some other cut there?
I guess it is. If it is, it was not significantly bleeding like this was, sir.
Was the blood that you observed on Mrs. Hatfield's body on that day coming from this wound and the spot depicted on Exhibit 21.6?
Yes, sir, it was.
Now, Ms. Hill, you described to this jury how you touched Mrs. Hatfield's head on the side of the road that day. I'd like you to show the jury one more time where you ran your hands over Ms. Hatfield's head, demonstrating on your own head, if you will.
You take your gloved hands and you start at the hairline and you go back and you're putting your hands in and looking. You look to see if there's blood on your hands as you're progressing down. I got about halfway down, I got blood, so I stopped and pulled the hair apart with my hands in numerous places until I could feel a cut. And then I saw there was something there, I wanted to feel it, so my middle finger came and fell right into where there was a laceration here.
Just to capture some of that on the record, Ms. Hill, did you move your hands across the top of Mrs. Hatfield's head and then down to the back of her head where you felt the laceration?
Yes, sir.
At any time when you were running your hands over Ms. Hatfield's head, did you feel any rocks that were stuck in her scalp?
I did not, sir.
Did you feel any, quote, foreign bodies stuck in her scalp?
No, sir.
And by foreign bodies, I mean anything that wasn't really a part of her body had been introduced there. Did you feel anything like that?
No, sir.
Did you at any point ever see any rocks embedded in Miss Hatfield's head?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you see any foreign bodies embedded in her scalp?
No, sir.
Ms. Hill, I think you told us you responded to somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 wrecks in your career. Have you seen what it looks like when somebody's head comes out the window and strikes the ground in a rollover?
Yes, sir, I have.
Describe that to the jury, please.
Usually you have a scraping or a type of road rash or a type of peeling back of the skin, abrasions, bruising and such.
Do you ever see dirt and debris?
Yes, sir.
Now, as you worked with Mrs. Hatfield, did you observe any of that scraping like you described on the side of her face that was near the window next to her?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you observe any of that scraping anywhere on her head?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you observe it on her neck?
No, sir.
How about on her shoulder?
No, sir.
Did you ride from the scene of this wreck to the hospital with Linda Hatfield?
Yes, sir, I did.
At any point during that ride, did you observe scraping like this on anywhere on Mrs. Hatfield's head or neck or shoulder?
No, sir, I did not.
What can you tell, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, about the scene of this rollover and the ground, specifically whether the ground was dry or whether it was wet that day?
It had been raining quite a bit. It was light rain, but for about an hour. So when I got out of our truck, it was already still misting, and it wasn't a heavy rain, but it was still raining. So it was muddy, and they were down an embankment up against the tree line. You could see where there was mud on the vehicle.
I'd like to show you what's already been marked as Plans Exhibit 2.6. Take a look at that, if you will. Is that a picture of the scene of this wreck?
Yes, sir, it is.
Is the ground muddy in that picture like you just described?
Yes, sir, it is.
Bob, would you put that up? That's 2.6. Now, as you worked near this car that had rolled over on the scene depicted in Plans 2.6, were you able to tell whether the hood of the car was muddy or dry?
Oh, yeah, it was very muddy, sir.
How about the other parts of the car that had touched the ground in the rollover? Were they muddy or were they dry?
They were muddy, sir.
I'd like to show you another picture, and this is Plans Exhibit 7.9. Is that a picture of the car involved in this wreck?
It is, sir.
Would you put that up, please, Bob? Now, looking at that picture and the car as depicted there, does it look like the car, consistent with your testimony a moment ago, is very muddy?
Yes, sir.
When you worked with Mrs. Hatfield out there on the scene of the wreck, was the top of her head muddy or was it dry?
It was dry, sir.
When you moved your hands across her head and pulled back your hands, did your hands have mud on them, or was it just blood and hair?
It was just blood and hair, sir.
I'd like to show you a couple more pictures from the scene. These are marked as plain as 7.22 and 7.23. Thanks. Take a look at those, please, and tell us if those are pictures from the scene of the wreck on the day of the wreck.
Yes, sir, they are.
Could you put up 7.22 and 7.23, please? Thank you. Now look at Mrs. Hatfield's, the top. Do those pictures kind of show Mrs. Hatfield's head from the top?
Yes, sir, they do.
Looking at Mrs. Hatfield's head from the top, do you see any mud stuck in her hair in either the 7.22 or 7.23?
I do not, sir.
Let's show the other to the jury, Bob. Unless you've already shown them those. Have they seen 2.2?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. As to the top of Mrs. Hatfield's head, then, Miss Hill, did you observe any mud stuck on it, pine straw stuck in it, sticks stuck in it, or rocks stuck in it, anything like that?
No, sir, I did not.
When you arrived on the scene of this wreck, was any part of Mrs. Hatfield's body hanging out her window, or was everything up under the roof?
It was under the roof, sir.
Did you see any evidence or any indication at all that would show to you, based on your training and your experience, that her head had come out the window and hit the ground?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you personally observe any evidence that her head was, quote, out the window or at the window, end quote, at the time she sustained her injury?
No, sir.
Is that what you told Ford's lawyers in your deposition almost 4 months ago?
Objection, Your Honor. It's improper question.
That's not a proper question, Mr. Butler. The prior consistent statements, there's no basis for that question to be asked.
All right, Your Honor, I'll
Sustain the
move on.
objection.
After you learned where the blood on Miss Hatfield was coming from, Miss Hill, what did you do?
I put a bandage across the top of it. That's all we could do at that point in time until they got the roof off so that we could get her out.
Did you start an IV or use a bag valve mask?
Yes, sir. Once they got the door open where we could get better access to her, the first thing we did was use a bag valve mask and give her oxygen because she could not hold her own airway. Then we had already had a C-collar put in place. We started IV fluids because at that point in time, if you are losing blood from somewhere or you're injured, you have to maintain a blood pressure. And at that point in time, we could not ascertain if she even had a blood pressure.
Were you able to get Mrs. Hatfield out of the vehicle?
Not until they removed the roof, sir.
And why did they have to remove the roof before Mrs. Hatfield could be removed from the vehicle?
Because of where she was and the neck injury that we suspected that she had, we did not want to manipulate her in any way before we pulled her out of the vehicle. And the roof was too far down next to her head.
Once the roof was removed, how did you get Mrs. Hatfield's body out of the car?
As a unit, we put a spine board underneath her edge of her and pulled her legs up onto the spine board, turned her sideways and laid her down and pulled her straight out of the vehicle.
Ms. Hill, this jury has been shown a photograph of Mrs. Hatfield's door handle that had some hair trapped in it, and I want to ask you some questions that relate to that. How many people were working along with you and your team in the area of Mrs. Hatfield's door handle?
About 4.
Who were they?
There were a couple of firemen from Puller Fire, and then Gabriel and myself. Chief Cowart was inside on the other side of her.
Were you wearing latex gloves as you worked on Mrs. Hatfield?
Yes, sir, I was.
Was anyone else?
Yes, sir. Gabriel had gloves on as well.
What happens when it's raining and you're wearing latex gloves and working on someone who has a scalp wound? Do the gloves get sticky?
Yes, sir. The blood sticks to them.
Does hair ever stick to your gloves?
Yes, sir. Occasionally it does.
Based on your experience, could hair have gotten transferred from Mrs. Hatfield's head to someone's glove, and then from someone's glove to the Mrs. Hatfield's door?
Objection form, Your Honor. It's leading the witness.
Your Honor, that's a question as to whether or not it was possible. We went through basically this exact question on the Benji Cowart deposition designations.
Your Honor, he's asking for speculation. Is it possible that...
I'll overrule that objection. Go ahead.
Ms. Hatfield, Ms. Hill, let me ask you one more time. Could hair have gotten transferred from Mrs. Hatfield's head to someone's latex gloves and then to Mrs. Hatfield's door that way?
Yes, sir.
When someone's being extricated from a car like this, do emergency first responders ever place a sheet over that person?
During extrication, yes, sir.
And why is that?
During extrication, you hear that from the jaws of life. That is the tools that we use to cut the car up to gain access to the patient, and it causes a lot of loud noise, popping sensations. Glass sometimes is thrown about and pieces of metal, and we usually cover up the patient with somebody underneath the sheet long enough to get whatever we're trying to get out of the way so that they don't get debris on them.
I believe it's, look at 7.9, which you've already got up there with you, Mary. And tell me if there's,
Ms. Hill, here in the courtroom, please.
Beg your pardon?
Ms. Hill, not Mary.
I'm sorry. Ms. Hill, does that show Mrs. Hatfield being covered by a sheet as you just described? That's plaintiff 7.9.
Yes, sir.
When a sheet is placed over someone like Mrs. Hatfield who has sustained a scalp wound, does hair sometimes get stuck to the sheet?
Yes, sir, it does.
I'd like for you to look at two other exhibits that you've got up there with you, please. That's 7.22 and 7.23. And let's just start with 7.22, Bob, if you wouldn't mind showing that. In 7.22, do we see that same sheet being pulled across Mrs. Hatfield's door as Mrs. Hatfield's door is being pulled from the vehicle?
Yes, sir, we do.
Could hair have gotten transferred from the sheet to the door handle in that way, based on your experience with so many wrecks?
Yes, sir, it could have.
Now, Ms. Hill, I note for the record that your hair is dark and has a little gray in it. Is that right?
Yes, sir, it is.
Were you wearing your hair down on the day of this wreck?
Yes, sir, I always wear my hair like this, sir.
I'd like to show you another picture. This is Plans Exhibit 7.39. Is that a picture taken on the scene that day?
Yes, sir, it is.
Would you show that one, please, Bob? And is that you in the back with your hair down there, Mary?
Yes, it is.
Was there ever any occasion where you were near the passenger side door or leaning in Mrs. Hatfield's window?
Yes, sir, when we initially got there.
Would your hair have been in the area of the door and the door handle and the B-post or B-pillar at that time?
Yes, sir.
Could your hair have gotten stuck in the door handle or somewhere else on the door at that
Yes, sir,
time?
it could have.
As you sit here today, Mrs. Hill, do you recall being on the scene of this wreck and treating Mrs. Hatfield?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you remember, as you sit here today, where the wound was on her head?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you remember, as you sit here today, what the roof looked like in this wreck?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury why you remember, please.
What was the question?
I asked her to tell the jury why she remembers.
You have significant events that we work through in our lives, significant calls. This is what I would refer to as a save, where we had somebody who was critically injured and they often die. And in this case, this lady did not die and she survived. So it's what we call a save. So it's something that we always remember because of that.
Thank you. I've got no further questions at this time.